Good evening. For those of you whom I have not yet had the pleasure of meeting, let me introduce myself. I'm Tamara Kaufman-Wittes. I'm the director of the Saban Center for Middle East Policy at the Brookings Institution, and delighted to be back here once again in Doha for this annual conference and for this evening's conversation. We've already had a very fruitful and rich series of discussions over the course of the day. I know that there are a number of topics that have come up repeatedly in our earlier conversations that we wanted to have an opportunity to explore this evening in a more relaxed and informal atmosphere, and to have a conversation with three of our extremely distinguished guests around the theme of our conference and the question of confronting change, the challenges and the opportunities that change presents. We gather tonight more than a year after the Arab Awakening began. The hope that was presented by revolutions in Tunis and Sana'a and Cairo has given way, as I think we've heard over the course of the day, to the hard daily work of building new institutions, and along with that, uncertainty, competition, and some anxiety. The struggle of some Arab citizens for change has been met with vicious violence. So the changes that are underway in the region today present hope, but they also present anxiety. Too many ordinary people have paid for freedom with their lives. And as new political forces engage, emerge, compete for votes, some worry, as we heard this morning, about polarization within society. And others worry about those forces who continue to resist change. In many places in the region, it's not yet clear how the demands for change will be accommodated or what the outcomes will be. But what is clear today is that those demands cannot be denied anywhere. As Ambassador Indyk said at the beginning of our evening, our U.S. Islamic World Forum has entered a new phase with the Arab Awakening. We speak now as peers about how to build a relationship on a new foundation of equality. And I'm so honored to be joined on this evening's panel by three people who have been leaders, leading change in the Arab world, people who will continue to be thought leaders going forward. And with them, we want to have a conversation tonight about how we think about the balance between challenge and opportunity as we face the dramatic changes underway in the Middle East. What I'm going to do is introduce each of them briefly and then lead off with a question for each one of our guests. And hopefully we will evolve into an active conversation that will include some of our audience as well. But knowing that we've already worked hard today, I promise you now that we will conclude our program by 10 o'clock. First, let me introduce Sheikh Abdallah bin Baya. Sheikh Abdallah, of course, is a scholar at King Abdulaziz University in Saudi Arabia. He is a citizen of Mauritania, a public servant, who studied also in the religious schools of Tunisia. And so, over the course of his distinguished career, he has engaged directly with so many different parts of the Arab world and so many different currents of thought. You heard him this morning in our plenary session say that there could be no single model for the Arab states now in transition, that each society must find its own path. And so, Sheikh Abdullah, when we begin our conversation in a few minutes after I introduce your colleagues, I'm going to ask you to help us think through the question of how a society with diverse opinions can form a consensus on the path for change. Let me introduce next Saab Erekat of Palestine. He is, of course, the chief negotiator for the Palestine Liberation Organization. Saab has been instrumental to the effort to achieve Middle East peace since the Madrid Peace Conference more than 20 years ago. But he's also been a professor, a politician, a strong voice for democracy and human rights in the Arab world. And Saab, I'm going to ask you in a few moments to address the question of how the past year's events have affected Palestinians and how they've affected the struggle for peace. We've heard from a number of our speakers this evening and over the course of the day that this unresolved conflict between Israelis and Palestinians is very much on their minds, and I know it's on the minds of many of the participants at this forum. So, Saab, we're very grateful to have you here with us. My pleasure. And finally, let me introduce Tawakkol Karman from Yemen, a journalist by trade, and a journalist who takes to heart that famous saying that the job of the journalist is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. Tawakkol, beginning in 2007, began protesting in Yemen on behalf of freedom of the press, and ultimately she led the demands for a democratic transition in Yemen. She was, of course, awarded the Nobel Peace Prize last year in recognition of her work and as a representative of a proud, rising generation of engaged Arab women. Tawakkol, we're so glad to have you with us. You and your colleagues faced a very difficult decision last year after fighting and protesting for democracy in Yemen. You ultimately agreed to a negotiated transition in which President Ali Abdullah Saleh would step aside, but the system he created remained largely in place. So I will ask you about that decision. Some looking at the situation in Syria today are suggesting that a Yemen-style transition is the best option for Syria. And so I think we would welcome your thoughts on that as well. So Sheikh bin Baya, thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to your thoughts on how divided societies with diverse opinions can find consensus on the way forward for change.
May all praise be to Allah, the Lord of the universe, and I am formerly Justice Minister in Mauritania and the Deputy Head of the Association of Muslim Scholars. I said maybe I ought to add to the title. I was Minister of Justice in Mauritania and Deputy Head of the Muslim Scholars Association of the world. As for your question, I would like to say that differences in opinion is normal because it emanates from different visions and different perceptions and the differences in interests, all of that will eventually lead to differences in opinions. But before that, what I would like to say is that these revolutions are cries of anger, and as some people put it, they are like minesweepers, bulldozers, sweeping anything in their path, but what they need is proper engineers and architects to engineer the process of building, a kind of engineering based on values, because it's through such values we will reach cohesion and understanding and synergies between differing ideas on the basis of consensus, and to reach common governing values which will be common to the different factions in every society, that they can agree upon resorting to settle their differences. For it is without such values we cannot imagine at all any possibility of reaching a consensus or understanding, because ultimately cohesion should replace difference, and humility should replace arrogance, and cooperation should replace a struggle for survival and exclusion, etc., etc. Such values are universal human values. They are found in religion and in every society. In fact, we'll have to find some sort of a reference or terms of reference that should rein in the extremism and excessiveness of differing and differences, and prepare the ground for some sort of coexistence, understanding, and common ground, which can or should only, which should not only be peaceful, but also a source for happiness and comfort for all. So therefore, this is the mission and the task and the objective of the elite, the scholars, the philosophers, the religious leaders, because after all, these are the ones who should present these universal values which should govern any minute details and the micro side of differences, which after all may be over simpler, smaller things. Recently there was a big difference between the scholars in this area on the visit of the Egyptian religious figure Al-Azhar Sheikh to visit Jerusalem. It became it was blown out of proportion almost, although it's a marginal issue. It became bigger because if the ones who visited stop visiting, it will not liberate Jerusalem, and the ones who do will not be able to do so. We can do nothing but leave it up to Almighty God, because these are marginal differences. They should not blind us from identifying the common values, be it human or religious in nature. Therefore, we are trying through revisiting and reviewing the concepts of the Sharia and religion to find basis for cooperation, basis for merciful treatment of others, basis for justice, wisdom, interest. These are the four principles upon which the religion of Islam is established. How can we inject this into the lives of people, because anything that contravenes wisdom is anarchy, and anything that contravenes justice is injustice, and anything that contravenes mercy is pain and inflicted on others. So therefore, such a task and such work requires an understanding and appreciation and conceptualization in case the translator doesn't understand this. I say we find the theoretical basis for concepts and then decimate them for the benefit of the public. This requires a sustained long-term effort, and we hope that the state of Qatar, through such events like the one we are attending today, will help contribute to enable and empower the voice of mercy, the voice of love and understanding and moderation, to be higher than the voice of warmongering, which can lead to nothing but catastrophes and calamities. It's human nature to search for alternatives, and dialogue can bring us closer. Alternatives to war. Plato says when we engage in dialogue, we'll find alternatives to war. This kind of alternatives are the ones we seek, and we think the common grounds in religions and the common human principles, in fact, far exceed the differences. If we refer to these higher causes and principles, we will be able to reach solutions. So therefore, these revolutions, they are at the beginnings of their lives. They are like a little child who learns how to walk. First he will stand, then he'll fall, and then start to walk. But we don't know yet whether it will walk, the child will walk upright or will struggle in achieving the proper kind of walking that he or she aspires to. At the same time, there are formidable obstacles. For the Islamists, this is the narrow, partial understanding of the tenets of Islam, which made some factions of them be intolerant of others, their co-citizens and co-religionists. Amongst obstacles also, talk of some people that they contribute the reasons for trouble to outside intervention and conspiracies. But the Holy Quran says you are responsible for your actions, so we should bear full responsibilities and not blame our failures on others, even if they were the staunchest of enemies. Maybe it's only expected that they will try being enemies, but it's up to us to do right and to do the proper things inside our countries and borders, so that we have cohesion, coexistence, development, the respect of mutual interests, and also the peculiarities of some factions or ethnicities, etc., should be made to serve the society in its entirety and be causes for unity, not sowing the seeds of division. And thank you. Shukran jazilan.
Your comment toward the end about the debate over external intervention versus the responsibility of those inside a society to forge their own destiny takes us quite naturally to your two colleagues on this panel. Let me begin, Saab, with you, if I may. And I think that many of us, watching the events of the last year, have wondered, what must Palestinians be thinking? And how will the tectonic plates that are shifting in this region change the nature of Palestinian politics and of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Please.
Thank you very much. In the name of God, the most merciful, the most compassionate, we as Palestinians, and for me as an individual, what happened, in fact, was the most important and momentous event that our area has seen in the last 1,000 years. In fact, this event, the U.S. Islamic World Forum, requires us to pinpoint the Arab relations. This relationship was not identified properly since the Ottoman armies laid siege to Vienna 1683 until now, and everyone who tried to raise his head was hit. Ask Muhammad Ali and anybody who tried to wage a campaign for development. Was Tunisia the first for democracy? In the 50s, Mossadegh was elected in Iran. He had more than 79 seats against 13 or so. The U.S. and Britain worked for 2 years to depose him, because at that time they chose General Zahedi and the former Shah of Iran at the expense of principles. Now, Saddam Hussein for them is a good dictator when he fights Iran for 8 years. Then he becomes a bad dictator when he occupies Kuwait. Gaddafi is Mother Teresa when they invest 35 billion in his country and Berlusconi kisses his hand. Then Italy bombards his country. So therefore, you see this. For the last 60 years, we had regimes who tried to strip the citizen of his legitimacy. What's happening now, people, the ordinary people, want to regain control on their lives, and there will be nothing that will serve the Palestinian cause more than the democracy. In the U.S. formal, if they don't like anything, they'll pick up the phone and call one leader and ask him to leverage and pose pressures on the Palestinians. But now democracy establishes peace, and nobody should fear democracy. When we refer to the ballot boxes and this attitude of creating bogeymen, saying Islamist one or the Muslim Brotherhood. I'm happy that Mr. Rashid Al-Ghannouchi is here, Dr. Abdullah Bey and others. I think all these parties, once they come to power, should declare their respect of international principles and the principles of democracy and etc. We do not need America or anybody. Now they come to us, they come to us and first trying to impose our respect of anything that relates to Israel, but they don't pay much attention to anything else. We are Arabs, we know conspiracy theories, etc. But after all, what we should not do, we should not say that we are first in trying to reclaim our rights. In 1848, Clemens Brunner, there were for weeks demonstrations in Vienna. He had to flee the country exactly like Ben Ali did, and 5 empires fell. In 1793, they brought King Louis under the guillotine, and it took them 2-3 goes to kill him because apparently the guillotine's blade was not sharp enough, exactly like what they did to Gaddafi.
To make the right people win. ما الذي سنفعله
حتى يربح الطرف الصحيح، حتى تربح الديمقراطية. So that democracy wins. when I was in Washington, London, or Paris, maybe I followed 112 different papers and studies. Everybody tells us the best example, Israel is the model. That Mubarak has run away, Ben Ali has run, the model is Israel. They forgot one elementary basic thing, that the model should not be based on occupation and apartheid and discrimination, because without ending the Israeli occupation, I'm not saying this because I'm Palestinian, by the way, but if we want to get rid of democracies and beat democracies and the backwardness that we suffer in all aspects of life, is to get rid of Israeli occupation and to establish a free Palestinian state with Jerusalem being its capital. I promised Martin not to say this. For 15 years, I repeat this sentence in Europe, in America, that when they say, anybody who says Arabs are not ready for democracy is exercising an act of discrimination, maybe, and racism. What the Arab people are going through, people with vision should embark immediately to take the necessary steps. This is a huge opportunity when the Arab citizen is determined to regain his rights, his security, his economy, his transparent good governance, women's rights, and I'm proud of Tawakkul. I have two twin girls, and one is an eye surgeon, and I chose Tawakkul as my third adopted daughter. She represents the example for our future. So therefore, now the atmosphere under democracies will bring us nearer to democracy and peace. The question now to the states,
what can we do to make the right people win? Two things. Peace. Today we have an Arab Peace Initiative. We have recognized Israel right to exist in peace and security in 6/7. طرفنا في إسرائيل حدود 67.
Recognize Israel, and now Israel is required to recognize us. Unless this happens, I think if you in the West thinking of repeating what you did to Damascus, then all your efforts will be in vain. We in the Arab world, with all due respect for all countries, there will be no exception in the Arab world, no matter of what is the nature of the ruling system or regime, how rich, how poor it is, because all our citizens want to improve their lot in life. This is an opportunity we should be invested in, and I think it's one of the most important ones to serve democracy. One last point, maybe in Libya, Yemen, Egypt, after this narrow-ended autocratic regimes, maybe we'll see some chaos at the beginning. And maybe through this chaos, a system will be on.
Then chaos. وهذا خطير. هذا خطير جدا.
And this is very dangerous, but we as Arab people, we think the time comes. The Americans have 40 million blacks, Jews, Muslims, Hispanics, Catholics, but there is a society, after all, a crucible. But if we still have people who say, I'm an Arab, I'm a Kurd, I'm a Turkmen, I'm a Shiite, I'm a Sunni, we should end all of this. We should belong to a modern state, and we should belong to this state first. And the fact that I am an Arab or a Kurd or a Shiite or a Sunni, this is something nobody can change. But together we must develop a fabric for society, a national fabric, and make sure that the ruler exists according to certain standards and not the owner of the system. And with all due respect for you, sir, but in Islam, the first religion in the world which negated autocracy in rule is Islam as a religion and Islamic thought. So therefore, today, utilizing Islam as a religion to enable a ruler to rule despotically over his people, I think these Islamic movements should by now declare their adherence to respecting democracies, human rights, women's rights, etc. And it's time for the West to declare that without democracy, without a Palestinian state, the only alternative is repeat the experiment with Musaddaq.
Thank you so much.
Shukran jazilan.
Let me turn to you now. And I have to note that not only do you represent civil society and in its struggle for democracy in Yemen, but you're also active in a political party which has been fighting for democracy in Yemen and which is, by many descriptions, an Islamist political party also. So I would be interested as well in your response to Sab's comments at the end.
First of all, I would like to thank you, Tamara. First of all, I would like to talk about your own introduction about the challenges and the fears with regard to the Arab Spring. And I said that we, the youth of the Arab Spring, we feel proud, we feel that we are victorious because we were able to put an end to the most powerful dictatorships in the world. And this world will thank us for hundreds of years because we were able to topple such kind of regimes and to come up with such kind of a historic era, and this is going to be appreciated and commented by the different generations. It would not be forgotten. So the time when Al-Gaddafi, Ben Ali, Mubarak, Ali Abdullah Saleh were toppled, and Bashar al-Assad in the near future. So we are proud you are proud of our experience, and we are proud of the role we have played, and we are also proud of the role that we're going to play in the future. The fears, between quotes, is only a challenge that we can overcome. It is no different, no more difficult, so no difficult than the challenges that we have faced before. It is no difficult than the regime, the despotic regime that we had that used to put an end to justice, to our youth, to what our youth want to do. So the countries of the Arab Spring, their youth, their women, their men, we have got two main challenges. Either in the Arab states which were able to topple their regimes, or in those states, in the remaining states, which is Syria, which is still has not toppled its regime, but it will do so. So these four states that were able to topple their regime, Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, and Yemen, we are now living the transitional period that you talked about. We are living the transitional period that will lead us to democracy through the principles that have made our youth have the revolution, to see the state of justice, the state of law, the state of rights, the state of freedom, the state of equality. And this is very important indeed. In all these states, we have got corruption. In all the Arab states, we have got corruption. And because of the corruption, the reason behind corruption is because there is no accountability. So how can we lead our states from the revolutionary era to the era of the civil state? And we have got another challenge is how to preserve our youth, how to protect our youth, and how our youth will continue in that strife in the transitional period and in the aftermath of the transitional period, with their peaceful tools that would force the institutions of the transitional government to be careful and to achieve the aims and objectives of the youthful revolution. And after this transitional period, how can this youth topple any corruption that would put the state back in a state of chaos? Because we're no longer going to live any dictatorship. And all the regimes who want to be dictators will be toppled. Now in Syria, as an example, and it is the only remaining countries of the 2011 Arab Spring, because we expect that we are going to have other states that will have their own spring. I'm not talking only about Arab states. I'm talking about other non-Arab states that will have and experience a spring. It will lead to a global awakening, a new spring that will topple, put an end to all dictators, be it in the Arab world or in the global world. Now, Syria. Syria is facing two main challenges. The most important challenge is the final declaration of toppling Bashar al-Assad. Now, Bashar al-Assad has been toppled because he's lost his legitimacy. Now, Bashar is not there. He's lost control on many parts of Syria because he's trying to rule with his tanks. That means that this rule is reaching an end very soon. We still have only a few details that we need to fix before we declare the end of the regime. We want the Syrian people to unify their ranks behind the opposition, because the experience in Yemen, I mean, there was a slowdown in process after the toppling of the president of Yemen, and after that it took us a while before they have paid their allegiances to the new power to take over. So the Yemenis, the political parties, unfortunately, did not want to rush or to speed up the process, but we were able to choose Abdelrabbu Mansour Hadi, who is the transitional president, and he is the the representative of the revolutionary legitimacy. That is why we call upon the Syrian to unify their ranks against the opposition and to decide who is going to be the substitute for the current regime. So this is a challenge that the Syrians are facing. So another challenge is that the Syrians have been let down by the international community. So the humanitarian consciousness, the human consciousness of the international community, I do not want to say it is dead, but it is asleep. It is in hibernation. I mean, there are youth, women, children dying on a daily basis. We have got hundreds of martyrs, hundreds of wounded who fall on a daily basis, and we have not seen any strong role played any of the countries. So I'm not blaming only the international countries. I'm blaming the Arab states, the Islamic states. We have to put an end to the killing. Up to now, the Bashar regime is still practicing its suppression with under an international umbrella. We still do not have any resolutions. We still have vetoes by Russia and China. And we still talk about mechanisms that would make the Syrians victorious. So we would like to have economic sanctions against the Bashar regime. Why not? Up to now, Bashar al-Assad was not considered as a criminal committing crimes against humanity and a war criminal. So the international community should move and move now in order to abide and to meet the responsibilities. And we should not wait and watch the Syrians being killed. We should not wait until the Syrians, reach an end in this revolution. We have to help them in there. We are going to be victorious. They are going to be victorious. But the international community should do their role. They should support the revolutionaries. They have to support the National Council. They should give them enough logistical and financial material support. That's what they need. They need the opportunity to have support because the autocratic regime practices killing, not because he can do that, because that would allow him to stay. I would like to say, from here, I would like to tell the United States they have to do their role in this respect. And as for the Yemeni model, it is a good model. Perhaps it would be suitable to be applied in Syria, but we do not want to give any immunity to the president. We have given immunity to our president and to his family with an international supervision, and this is a stigma in the forehead of all the international community, because who have put a blind eye to all the principles, international principles, and without such kind of immunity that was given to Ali Abdullah Saleh, he would not have continued in destabilizing this transitional period. He has done so because he was given such kind of immunity. We are going to be victorious. We're going to meet the aims and objectives of our revolution. In our Arab world, we are living a transitional period from which we're going to achieve our aims, and Syria will move to the transitional period with our support or without our support. So we have to choose. We have to choose whether to support them in that transition, to be with the people, or with the regime and the stay of the regime. We have chosen to be with all the people who are aiming to achieve dignity and freedom, and the international community has to choose that now. We do not need to have another massacre for the international community to wake up. And I would like to thank France and Germany for asking the Syrian ambassador to leave their countries. Thank you very much.
Tawakkul, thank you. When I entered the dinner this evening, I think there were at least a half a dozen countries that had already ordered the expulsion of their senior Syrian diplomats, including the United States, I have to add. Listening to the three of you this evening, I hear a couple of core messages. One, I hear, whether you fear change or not, change is here. And the question is, how do we seize the opportunities that change presents? And I've heard from the three of you a couple of key opportunities. Well, let me cite three and then open it up maybe for one or two questions before we close for the evening. The first opportunity, Sheikh bin Baya noted, is that in dialogue, speaking together in good faith with one another honestly, we can identify common values on which to build a new architecture for our relationships within a given society and in international relations. We're going to be discussing this topic further in our long conversation session tomorrow, and I look forward to joining all of you for that. The second opportunity that I heard is about what the people who made the revolutions symbolize and what they intend. And I think Tawakkul expressed it very clearly. that this rising generation in the Arab world is determined to play a role. It's determined to shape its own destiny. And what that means is that regardless of the first wave of political decisions in elections or bargaining by elites, this rising generation will be there to hold their leaders accountable and to achieve their goals. And that's an opportunity. And it also allows us to look at any given development and understand that that's not the end of the story. Yes. The third opportunity, I think, was addressed eloquently by Saab. The opportunity that we have today to break the mold of our previous relationships and to build a framework for cooperation that's rooted in shared commitments, shared interests, and shared commitments to peace and to dignity. I am grateful to all of you for identifying for us and articulating so beautifully those opportunities, and I think the work that we have before us in the next 2 days is to identify concrete ways that we can realize these opportunities together, working together. With that, let me see whether there are any questions in our audience, and I see one gentleman. Yes, sir. Do we have a microphone, Jumana? Yes, it's coming. And sir, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name is Mohammed Usman Tariq from Afghanistan.
Welcome.
And listening to all these three excellent presentations, a question came to my mind, and that's, we are in a learning process in Afghanistan, but we already had some lessons learned. And one of them is that making revolution is very easy. To continue the revolution is difficult because revolution is coming in a short time. It cannot produce the maturity needed for its continuation. Our colleagues in Arab world, how did they see, how do they see the future of this revolution in different countries? Going back to the changes, 80% of changes are failed in the world. This is another dimension for the revolution as well. This is kind of my question, how much this revolution will continue to attain the goal and objectives and will be successful and will help the people to achieve their goals and be prosperous. As we heard from our Egyptian colleagues this morning, he was disappointed about after five months of parliamentary election in Egypt and what will happen after 2 years. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Let's hear all the questions.
Yeah, why don't we take one more question from the audience, and then I'll give our panelists a chance to respond. Professor Iravani, yes.
This is Ahmed Iravani, originally from Iran, but living in Washington, D.C. I would like to thank all of you for a wonderful presentation. What I would like to say that to my dear...
Can you speak up just a bit
yes,
first? Thank
my
you.
dear brother Saab Barakat, although I agree with what you said, but we should not limit the problem with America and Arab world, which you were emphasizing. If it is not Islamic world, it's the whole world, I think. The problem is between maybe America or West with the whole world. We should not limit our issue to the Arab world, the problem. Now, the second issue, although I agree with the sister with what she said, but again, about the problem in Syria, but we should not limit the injustice which is happening only in Syrian situation. There are some issues happening in Bahrain, in other parts of the world, And also we have to, if we want to mention something, then we have to mention other crises as well and be fair towards problem of other minorities in other parts of the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. Seeing the time, I'm going to give each of our panelists 2 minutes, please, to respond. Tawaka, would you like to begin?
دائما نقول هذه الكلمة.
Repeat that the revolutions do not end with deposing a dictator. In fact, they start with deposing dictators and dictatorships. All Arab revolutions have not ended yet. They only achieved the first phase. Now we're going through the second and the third phases. The second speaks of changing all the heads of the security apparatuses, army, etc., corruption. And the third speaks of establishing the new institutions. All Arab Spring countries, with the exception of Syria, are going through the second and the third phase. In Tunisia, now the institutions are almost completely built. In Yemen, they are on their way. In Egypt, now with the presidential elections, they are working on forging these new institutions and establishing them. Libya as well. But all of us are in a continuous movement of revolution. We know these revolutions should achieve all their aims, and we all have one means, and that is the peaceful ones. Demonstrations, protests, sittings, etc., and through dialogue with all other parties for the sake of building our countries, because it's true what they say. In the first phase, when revolutions depose and unseat dictators, may not be the easiest phases, but they are usually the shortest. These are amongst the most difficult, but we also believe that revolutions mean destroying, deconstructing, and reconstructing, and building or rebuilding. So we must get rid of all these symbols of corruption and autocracy who stand between us and achieving our gains. What guarantees of success do we have in the transitional period? Two things: partnership and the continuation of the revolutionary action through its both types of political pressure and the political work as well. If it's only confined to dialogues, discussions, negotiations, etc., the revolutions will not achieve its aim. So therefore, the partnership is the key word in the transitional period. The best form of partnership was offered by the Tunisian revolution. They offer the best example so far, and we hope that our brothers in Egypt, that they present us with another example, another model, and we in Yemen have one way or another a form of partnership, good partnership with the ruling party, which was never a ruling party. We consider the ruling party as a party, a victim of the security apparatus so much as we were. I don't want to take too much of your time. Be sure and rest assured that revolutions will win, and we, the revolutionary youth, will establish the democratic modern state that we dream of, that we strived for and sacrificed so much for, but only achieve the first part of by deposing dictators. Shukran, Sheikh bin Bayer. In the name of God, the most merciful, the most compassionate. In fact, I heard the question from our brother in Afghanistan who asked about what will guarantee that these revolutions will end up with reforming and improving our lot in life. What I would like to say is these revolutions did not start based on proper programs as such, because there was no leadership to lead them. They were closer to a spontaneous act by people under pressure and oppression, and they were mostly youth. The youth, in fact, led these revolutions. They led these revolutions while the ship of these revolutions were still in the middle in the sea, and the captain jumped off ship, and the passengers on board this ship, maybe sometimes they fight between them as to who should be the captain and take the reins and lead the ship. This is still something which constitutes a problem, but I think this dynamism will not go backwards. The ship will not move backwards. The rulers of tomorrow will not be similar to the ones of yesterday. Revolutions have their voice, and the masses have their voice. Tawakkul expressed this in her own animated way. This explains the fact that she is a revolutionary girl after all, and this is a certain phase. This is the discourse her kind of revolutionaries usually employ. But these revolutions must achieve something. Maybe the price paid will be too high, as demonstrated in Syria, but let me volunteer to talk about the situation in Bahrain. I think the problem in Bahrain is a huge problem, exactly as much as the Syrian problem is a big problem. The fact that there is two parallel lines of Sunni and Shia lines for the first time for a long time, with animosity between them, this constitutes a big problem, because this may end up causing a war that nobody wants, and it will benefit nobody, and it's a kind of a war in which everybody will be a loser. But I want to tell you something through my experience in the Islamic Scholars Association, through our discussions with Ayatollah Taskhiri and Nu'mani and other Ayatollahs who represent leadership positions. The big problem is not in Iran being strong. This is a right of Iran to be strong. And neither it is that Iran being a nuclear power, for this may be a right of Iran, because no country which possesses a nuclear weapon will not be able to use it, because if they do, it means they will destroy themselves. Even the Israelis, although the West supports them totally, sometimes even blindly, they too cannot use nuclear weapons that they possess. But the problem in Iran is religious leadership in Iran since the beginning of the Islamic revolution, and this religious leader gives leadership and commands to any Shiite person, even if they are citizens of other countries. So therefore, these citizens who are disconnected with their own countries and follow orders which come from across the border from Iran, and this constitutes a big problem. And on top of that, some brothers in the Lebanon and even in Iraq who do not support the revolution in Syria because Iran doesn't support it. And the same applies to Kuwait. This is a dilemma Iran should seek a solution for, because any religious leadership which is established in a country but has followers in other countries, and this leadership does not offer them guidance only, it gives them leadership and issues commands. This requires dialogue to reach a solution, an alternative to war, because if the war happens and the West will not help either of us, they will look at us both with the eyes of that I did not order you to fight, so therefore it will not harm me if you continued regardless. Thank you. شكرا لك صائب، تفضل. أعتقد
example, and Sarah, I also mentioned that what's happening in the Arab world is not exclusively to these 5-6 countries. It's going to cover everyone. And when I spoke about chaos and order developing within chaos, we're not the first revolutions to face this. Thomas Jefferson, when he saw the chaos system after the French Revolution, he said, and I read in Arabic what Thomas Jefferson said, I'll translate it.
The French Revolution entering a state of chaos, I hoped that half of Earth will be destroyed, but the revolution is not destroyed. Even if there remains one Adam and one Eve in every country, or in each country who are free, things will be better after all. I think when I said that this event, momentous event, is the most important in 1,000 years of our history, because I fully appreciate what it means to be a free person and the importance of freedom. And now, tawakkul, now we want institution building in Yemen. These are regimes which destroyed all institutions. In 40 years, they took us back 500 years, no cultural, educational, health, or any other institutions. We have to write up new constitutions.
Rule of law, one authority, one gun, the principles of institution building.
This is what Yemen wants, and this is what Afghanistan wants. But if we continue saying Sunni, Shiites, Copts, Turkmens, etc., we will not continue the 21st century before achieving anything. I know that people are slaves to their vested interests, and everybody wants to utilize factionalism, religious ideology, ethnicity, etc. But we as Arabs and Muslims have a real chance now, a real opportunity. We said right from the start that this area,
2012, 20.5 million barrels a day. The members of the OECD countries will consume 46 million barrels a day, 1/3 of which will come from this region. President Obama, to his credit, he said in May that human rights and our national interests are not contradictory to each other. What's the balance? Because for 60 years, the US administrations tried to establish allies and preserve interests and spoke about democracy every once in a while. They ended up with neither. There is no contradiction between safeguarding the interests of the US and Western world and Arab democracy. But then we should not also just talk about the West. There are things that we need to do as Arabs and as Muslims. We live in nation states. We have national flags. Nation states are not merely names. So each household in Palestine or Afghanistan or in Iran or in Iraq or in Lebanon will be an independent nation state. It's time for us to know what nation states require in constitutions, institution building, the rule of law. This region needs not wars or the drums of wars. This region needs the institutions that will enable us to move forward in our economic, educational developments, because that's what the future requires. Thank you very much.
Because of that, we made the revolutions to create that.
For that, they made the revolutions.
Good line.
I want to wish you all a good evening. You know, it's already 10:15, which is past when I promised our friends that they could go to bed.
1 minute.
Sheikh, please.
أنا أريد
I don't want people to misunderstand that what I'm calling for is for a difference and discord between Shiites and Sunnis. I call for unity between everyone. I just want to say that this area needs peace, and we require to look for a solution by the rational people and scholars. We call upon the scholars of the world to unite, like what the communism used to call for the workers in the world to unite. Now, when I discuss issues of minorities in Islamic majority countries, Muslim majority countries, I believe that they have their full rights, and we have to, but all of us work together to distance ourselves and work against the threats against us.
I'm going to close for the evening. I want to make two brief notes. Number one, we begin again tomorrow morning. Yes, a bit early. At 8 o'clock, we have a special panel on arts and culture, which is a sector that we've brought together at this forum for a number of years, and we've had some very exciting cooperation and relationships built. Secondly, the working groups will begin again at 9:15, and I want to highlight for all of you, there's been a lot of discussion today of what should be the American role in the region. Deputy National Security Advisor Dennis McDonough will be with us tomorrow afternoon to discuss precisely that topic, and I look forward to seeing all of you tomorrow. Thank you so much. Good night.